You know, there's something rather peculiar that happens when you begin to wake up. And by wake up, I don't mean simply opening your eyes in the morning or having a nice cup of coffee. I mean when you really begin to see through the game, when the veil of ordinary consciousness starts to slip and you catch a glimpse of what's actually going on here. It's quite marvelous, really. But here's the thing that nobody tells you. Once you've had that glimpse, once you've tasted that freedom, there are certain things you simply cannot share. Not because they're secret in some mystical hush-hush way, but because sharing them would be like trying to pour the ocean into a teacup. It just doesn't work. And more than that, attempting to do so can actually create more confusion than clarity. So let me tell you about 5 things that if you are spiritually awake, you should never share. Not out of spiritual pride, not because you're part of some exclusive club, but simply because these things cannot be communicated in the way that ordinary information can be communicated. They're more like the scent of a flower. You can describe it all day long, but until someone smells it for themselves, they haven't really got it. Now, the first thing you must never share is your direct experience of awakening itself. You see, the moment you wake up, there's this tremendous urge to tell everyone about it. You want to grab people by the shoulders and say, look, I've seen it. It's all right here. We've been looking in the wrong direction the whole time. But what happens when you do this? The other person looks at you with a mixture of confusion and concern. They nod politely. They might even say that's wonderful for you, but inside they're thinking you've gone a bit strange. Why is this? Because awakening is not an idea. It's not a concept that can be passed from one mind to another like a recipe for bread. It's a lived reality. It's the difference between reading about swimming and actually being in the water. When you try to describe the water to someone who's never been wet, what do they hear? Just words, just sounds. The actual feeling of water, the way it holds you, the way it moves around your body that cannot be captured in language. I once knew a man who had what you might call a profound spiritual experience. He was walking in the garden one evening and suddenly everything became transparent. He saw that he was not a separate being walking through a garden, but rather the entire process of gardening was happening. There was no walker and no garden, just walking gardening as one movement. Well, he was so excited by this that he rushed to tell his wife. And what did she say? She said, "That's nice, dear. Don't forget to take out the rubbish." You see, she couldn't receive what he was trying to give because she hadn't had the experience. It's like trying to explain the color red to someone who was born blind. You can talk about wavelengths of light. You can describe how it makes you feel, but you cannot give them the direct experience of redness. And spiritual awakening is far more subtle than even that. So what happens when you insist on sharing this experience? You begin to sound like you're bragging. "Oh, I've had this marvelous insight. I've seen the truth. I understand what life is really about." And immediately you've created a division. You've put yourself over here as the awakened one and the other person over there as the unawakened one. And in doing so, you've actually contradicted the very insight you were trying to share, which is that there is no division, no separation, no you and them. The awakened person learns to be quiet about their awakening, not out of false modesty, but because they understand that talking about it is like a finger pointing at the moon. The finger is useful if someone wants to look where it's pointing, but if they're fascinated by the finger itself, they'll miss the moon entirely. And most people, when you try to share your awakening, become fascinated by your finger. They want to know what you did to get awakened. They want the technique, the method, the secret practice. But awakening didn't happen because you did something. It happened when you stopped doing and simply saw what was already there. The second thing you must never share is the specific practices or methods that worked for you. Now this might sound contradictory. Surely if something worked for you, wouldn't it be helpful to tell others? But here's the trick. What worked for you worked because it was right for you at that particular moment in your life. It fit your temperament, your situation, your particular flavor of confusion. Imagine you have a headache and you take a certain medicine and the headache goes away. Does this mean everyone with a headache should take that same medicine? Of course not. One person's headache might be from tension, another's from lack of sleep, another's from dehydration. One person's headache might be from a person. The same medicine won't work for all of them. In fact, it might harm some of them. Spiritual practices are exactly like this. What brings one person to clarity might trap another person in technique. I might sit quietly and watch my breath, and in that watching suddenly see through the illusion of the separate self. But if I tell you, you must sit and watch your breath, you might spend years sitting and watching and getting absolutely nowhere, because your particular knot is different from mine. There was a student who came to his teacher and said, "Master, I've been meditating for 5 years, just as you instructed, and I still haven't had any awakening." The teacher laughed and said, "Perhaps you should stop meditating." The student was shocked. "But you told me to meditate." "Yes," said the teacher, "and now I'm telling you to stop. You've turned meditation into another form of striving, another way of trying to become something you think you're not. Stop trying to be awakened and see if you're not already awake." You see, the moment you give someone a method, they turn it into a goal. They think, if I do this practice correctly, I will achieve enlightenment. And now they're further from awakening than when they started, because they've created a future moment when they imagine they'll be complete. But awakening is not in the future. It's only now. It's seeing what's already here, not creating something new. It's seeing what's already happening. The third thing you must never share are your insights about other people. When you wake up, one of the things that happens is you begin to see people very clearly. You see through their masks, their pretenses, their games. You can see when someone is operating from fear, when they're defending an image, when they're lost in their own story. And there's a tremendous temptation to help them by pointing this out. But this is almost always a mistake. Why? Because people are not ready to see themselves until they're ready. And when they're ready, they'll see it themselves. They don't need you to tell them. In fact, if you tell them before they're ready, you'll only create resistance and resentment. Think about it this way. Suppose you see a butterfly struggling to emerge from its cocoon. You think, "Oh, I can't help. I'll cut open the cocoon and free the butterfly." But if you do this, the butterfly will die. Why? Because the struggle to emerge is what strengthens its wings. Without that struggle, it cannot fly. Why? In the same way, people need to struggle with their own confusions in their own time. Your helpful insight, delivered before they're ready for it, might actually harm them. I remember sitting with a friend who was going on and on about how unfairly he'd been treated at his work. He'd been passed over for promotion, and he was convinced it was because his boss had something against him. Now I could see quite clearly what was actually happening. My friend had a certain arrogance, a way of dismissing others' ideas that made him difficult to work with. This was the real reason he wasn't promoted. But did I tell him this? No, because he wasn't asking to see himself clearly. He was asking for validation of his victim's story. If I'd said, "Actually, you're rather arrogant and dismissive," what would have happened? He would have become defensive. He might have ended our friendship. And he still wouldn't have seen the truth, because he wasn't ready to see it. So instead, I listened. I made sympathetic noises. And then months later, without any prompting from me, he suddenly said, "You know, I think I might have been a bit difficult to work with." There it was. There it was. The insight arose in him naturally when he was ready for it. The awakened person learns to trust this natural process. They don't rush around trying to enlighten everyone. They understand that consciousness awakens in its own time, like a flower opening in the morning. You cannot force the petals open, you can only provide the right conditions and then step back. The fourth thing you must never share is your experience of the void, the emptiness, the fundamental groundlessness of existence. This is perhaps the most dangerous thing to share, because it can be deeply disturbing to someone who isn't ready for it. You see, when you really wake up, one of the things you see is that there's nothing solid anywhere. Everything you thought was permanent and real turns out to be more like a dance, a flow, a process. Your own sense of self, which feels so solid and continuous, is actually more like a river. You can say there's a river, but if you try to grab it, you get nothing but water passing through your fingers. The river is not a thing, it's a happening. Now this realization can be incredibly liberating. It means you're not stuck being who you think you are. It means all your problems, all your anxieties, all your carefully constructed identities are like clouds passing through the sky. But to someone who hasn't seen this yet, it sounds terrifying. It sounds like you're saying nothing matters. that everything is meaningless, that we're all just random collections of atoms bouncing around with no purpose. I once made the mistake of trying to explain this to a colleague. We were having dinner, and he was talking about his plans for the future, all the things he wanted to achieve, the person he wanted to become. And I said, rather unwisely, there really is no you to achieve anything. What you call yourself is just a pattern, a habit of thought. It's not real in the way you think it's real. Well, he looked at me as if I'd just announced I was going to rob a bank. "What are you talking about?" he said. "Of course I'm real. I'm sitting right here. I have thoughts, feelings, memories. How can you say I'm not real?" Then he became quite upset. He thought I was denying his existence, dismissing his life as meaningless. What I was actually trying to say is that he's real, but not in the way he imagines. He's not a separate, isolated self, trapped in a bag of skin. He's the whole universe expressing itself as a particular pattern called him. But he couldn't hear this because it threatened his entire sense of identity. And without a stable sense of identity, he felt he would fall apart. This is why the great teachers throughout history have been very careful about who they share the deepest teachings with. They understood that these teachings are like medicine. In the right dose, at the right time, they heal. In the wrong dose, at the wrong time, they poison. The truth about emptiness, about the void, about the groundlessness of existence, this truth must be approached gradually, gently, or it can shatter someone's world before they have the capacity to rebuild it. And the fifth thing you must never share is your sense of ultimate freedom, and why you no longer feel bound by conventional rules and morality. When you wake up, you see that all the rules, all the shoulds and shouldn'ts, all the moral codes and social conventions are just agreements, games we've all decided to play. And you realize you're free to play or not play as you choose. But if you announce this to people, if you say, "I'm beyond good and evil, I no longer follow conventional morality, because I see it's all just made up," people will think you've become dangerous. They'll think you're going to start robbing banks or harming people, because you no longer believe in moral rules. What they don't understand is that true freedom is not the freedom to harm. When you really wake up, you see that harming others is harming yourself, because there is no real separation. The person you hurt is just another aspect of the same consciousness that you are. So naturally, spontaneously, you treat others with kindness. Not because a rule tells you to, but because that's what flows naturally from the understanding of unity. A truly free person follows the spirit of the law while being free of the letter of the law. They act morally not out of fear of punishment or hope of reward, but because moral action is simply what happens when you see clearly. They're kind, not because kindness is virtuous, but because unkindness would be as strange as punching yourself in the face. But try explaining this to someone who still believes morality comes from external authority, from God or society or some cosmic rulebook. They cannot understand how you can be both free from morally rules and yet act morally. To them, it seems like a contradiction. So they assume you're either lying about your freedom or you're secretly immoral, and just haven't acted on it yet. The awakened person learns to follow social conventions, even while knowing their convention. They play the game because not playing would create unnecessary conflict and confusion. They pay their bills, they obey traffic laws, they treat people with respect, not because they must, but because it's simply easier and more harmonious to do so. They're like a master actor who knows it's all a play, but gives their performance everything they've got anyway. So there you have it. 5 things you must never share if you are spiritually awake. Your direct experience of awakening. Your specific practices and methods. Your insights about other people. Your understanding of emptiness and groundlessness. And your sense of freedom from conventional morality. Does this mean you can never talk about spiritual matters? Of course not. But there's a difference between pointing towards something and claiming to have captured it. There's a difference between offering a possibility and insisting on a conclusion. The awakened person speaks, but they speak lightly. They suggest rather than assert. They invite rather than command. They know that words are fingers pointing at the moon, and they never confuse the finger with the moon itself. And perhaps most importantly, They've learned that the deepest teaching is not in words at all. It's in presence. It's in the way they move through the world. It's in their laugh, their silence, their simple being. It's in the way they can feel when they're in the presence of someone who's awake. They feel it as a kind of peace, a kind of spaciousness, a sense that this person is somehow at home in the universe, in a way that most people aren't. So be quiet about your awakening. Live it rather than talk about it. And trust that those who are ready to wake up will wake up. Not because you push them, but because consciousness itself is waking up through all of us, each in our own time, each in our own way. And if someone really wants to know, if they really come to you with genuine curiosity and readiness, then by all means speak, but speak as one beggar, telling another beggar where to find bread, not as someone who has arrived telling someone else how to get there. Because the beautiful secret is this: there's nowhere to get to. We're already there. We've already there. We've always been there. We're just playing this magnificent game of pretending